So, earlier this week, I was looking at those die shots of Medusa Point that I leaked last year, just kind of looking for clues as to if there was anything that I missed so far about this thing's design, and then I did actually notice something. Those rectangles on the IO die that me and my contributors thought looked like possibly 4 work groups for integrated graphics, which I had actually, in my defense, documentation also showing 4 work groups, which would be 8 RDNA 4 CUs on this APU. Yeah, I thought to myself, actually, doesn't that look kind of more like 4 big cores and 4 little cores? And then I thought, wait, wasn't there some other leak a couple months ago that was claiming the IO die on Medusa Point was actually its own APU? Oh yeah, there was. Well, then I started taking this contrary leak about what Medusa Point might be very seriously, and I looked through some of my other documents, and I have to be honest, technically none of the documentation that I had said that the IO die couldn't be its own APU, that this variant that had a 3nm monolithic die still was listed next to having chiplets. Maybe it wasn't that these were 2 variants, or even if they were, maybe one of the variants could operate as its own IO die. I mean, even if I look at that diagram I just mentioned, that mentioned RDNA 4 in Medusa Point, it says 12 cores of Zen 6, but then also classic and dense cores. It doesn't technically say that it's 12 classic and dense. It's a different line. Maybe it means it's a mix of 2 different types of Zen 6 cores. And so then I went to a handful of my AMD sources and I said, hey, is there anything on the documents that we looked through that you think we missed that could suggest this counter rumor could actually be correct? Is there anyone you can ask? Can you please ask around? What's going on here? And yeah, it seems like this is actually the way Medusa 1 works. And Medusa 1 is the flagship Medusa Point Zen 6 APU that should be coming out in about a year, maybe a little less than that, from now. Of course, I'll be linking to videos that you'll see mentioned on screen that you can go watch if you want more of the background details of this. But the point is, Medusa Point, this APU coming out in about a year or whatever, it apparently does have a monolithic TSMC 3nm design with 4 big cores, 4 C cores, and 2 low power cores in 8 graphics compute units. According to some documentation I've seen, it is based on RDNA 4, considering this is coming out maybe December this year, but most likely the first half of next year. I would think by then they would want to use RDNA 4 because of how much more efficient it is, but whether it uses RDNA 3.5 plus 3.75 or RDNA 4, it does seem to be a monolithic 3nm APU with 10 cores total, 8 compute units, and as long as you put it in a new FP10 socket, the ability to add another 12 cores on top of it for a total of 22 cores. Now look, at first I know this might sound crazy to a lot of you to have an APU with a configuration this lopsided, 22 cores and only 8 compute units in this oddly shaped APU. But the more I thought about it, this configuration might actually be brilliant. Let me explain why. So the first thing to address, I think, is the seemingly disappointing news that the base model will only have 4 big cores and 4 C cores or whatever. And while that sounds like a downgrade from the 12 cores in Strix, consider the following. So the monolithic IO die model that won't have the 12-core chiplet added onto it, I believe this model still fits into the FP8 socket that exists, meaning that AMD has managed to fit, as I've already leaked, a 200mm square die into the same socket, which means into the same laptops they are already supplying and that are being sold, meaning that if they would have tried to go with more cores and compute units, with how powerful these compute units and these cores are, they might have had trouble actually fitting it into the old socket. So this allows them to bring Zen 6 to their existing laptops without, not giving you an upgrade. And I do think it will be an upgrade. That's the other thing about this. In single threading, this is going to crush Strix Point. No question about that. And even with 10 cores total, even though 2 of them are low power cores, they still are Zen 6. They still can be used like normal cores. And with how much more powerful Zen 6 cores are going to be, with potentially the clocks of Zen 6C cores approaching some Zen 5 classic products in clock speed, I think it's conceivable that even in multi-threading, the monolithic, non-upgraded version of this APU with just 10 cores might be close to Strix Point in multi-threading. Again, well, fitting within 200 millimeters squared, as I've leaked, therefore keeping costs down and fitting into the old socket. This makes a ton of sense. So that's the first thing. Now, the second point I want to make is this premium configuration that goes up to 22 cores. One thing is that I was told is that this will require a new FP10 socket, and that will get access to the most premium laptop designs with the fastest memory on the market. And separating it that way has a few benefits. First, I have thought for years that AMD's CPUs are overpowered in their APUs compared to the weak integrated graphics they give you. This solves that problem by only having to give you 10 cores if you're not going to use dedicated graphics. So think about, you see where I'm going with this? If you're going to add 12 cores to the APU, you're also probably going to add dedicated graphics. So why would you need more than 8 compute units, right? This might even make it so AMD doesn't really need a successor to Kraken, the cut down, weaker, smaller 8-core die that's out there right now with Zen 5. They just have one APU with 8 powerful compute units and 10 decent cores, and that's a good match by itself. And then in one laptop design, when all OEMs start switching to this new FP10 socket, in that one design, they can say, hey, do you want to add 12 cores and a new GPU? And they don't even have to have an entirely new CPU design. They can just both upgrade the same laptop chassis. I think that's actually pretty brilliant. I mean, if you think about it, it seems like the Zen 6 Medusa family has been designed through the lens of saving as much silicon and therefore as much cost for AMD and their customers as possible. It's actually pretty dang smart. And, well, speaking of saving silicon, let's talk about what could be a smaller set of integrated graphics in Medusa Point, 8 compute units versus the 16 in Strix Point. So the first thing we have to say about this is do not forget that whether it's RDNA 4, which I've documentation to back up it should be, by the way, or what other leakers have claimed on Twitter, that it's going to be 3.5 plus, whatever that really means. I mean, frankly, 3.5 plus could be interpreted to mean 3.5 or better. I think we can agree that it seems like Medusa Point's compute units will be a newer architecture that is better than what was in Strix Points. So this isn't apples to apples. It will be stronger per compute unit. And then think about this. This is going to be on 3 nanometer, especially if it's an iteration of RDNA 4 on 3 nanometer. I mean, you're talking about something that could be clocking to 3.5 gigahertz. It's a better node than what we see RDNA 4 on right now. And if it's at 3.5 gigahertz, I mean, I don't know, 8 CUs of a much stronger architecture running like at 20% higher clock speeds than what Strix Point gives you. Already that's starting to sound like something that could approach the same performance anyways. And then consider that testing has repeatedly shown that Strix Point, the Zen 5 APUs you can get right now, they're pretty bandwidth starved, with the cut down 12 compute unit model often being around the same performance as the 16 compute unit model. So think about it. How much stronger is Strix Point really with 16 compute units? And so if you have 8 compute units that are clocked substantially faster with a better architecture on a newer node, I don't know, guys. This could be like when AMD launched Renoir, where I believe they went from something like 11 to 8 compute units and yet still raised performance. That is possible, I think. Now, look, to be clear, I'm not 100% sure that's what's going to happen. I'm just making the argument that especially if it is RDNA 4 on 3 nanometer, that this APU, despite having half the compute units of its predecessor, could actually match or beat it in performance. But it might not. There is that chance that AMD is simply downgrading the integrated graphics in their Point APUs because they see it as redundant. Do not forget that when Strix Point came out, it was it. Strix Halo was not out. You didn't have these stronger 40 compute unit APUs. And so maybe back then it made sense to push it a little further. But now in a world where AMD is going to be launching all tons of different types of APUs with various configurations, that it's redundant to try to make these Point products take the mantle of decent laptop gaming. If you want decent laptop gaming, AMD should just design other APUs with more compute units, like Medusa Halo, which is coming out, and maybe like Magnus. Yep, I have an insane APU, Zen 6 Magnus, that I want to leak to you all with a lot more than 16 compute units. And I also want to update you on a few more things about Zen 6 today, but first, an ad from a sponsor. This piece of content is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. CDkeyoffer.com is really the best place to go to get reasonable pricing on Microsoft software, whether that's Windows 11 operating systems or Office products like the ones that I installed on this new Strix Halo laptop that I was testing while I made this ad. You see, I actually use CDkeyoffer.com. I've used them many times. My family members use them. My friends use them when they're building new PCs, and that's because they've been a reliable sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead for years now. And so if you're looking to get, say, a new laptop, or you just finally want to get a legitimate key of one of the latest Office products on your desktop during back to school, use CDkeyoffer.com's offer codes of Broken Silicon to save 25% on all Microsoft products. And then actually you can also use offer code DieShrink to save 3% on everything else on their website, like games as well. Once again, I want to thank CDkeyoffer.com for sponsoring this content, like all the other content that they've sponsored, and for making it easy for me to get a good price on Office on my new laptop. All right, so in the first part of this video, I threw a ton of things at you that involved changes to what I had already leaked about Zen 6 products, and I thought it wouldn't be right to just gloss over that and not summarize all of it for you with a slide like I did months ago. That slide, it needs to be updated, and so I have today. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll do a proper leak, I'm sure, in the coming months about Zen 6 and Zen 7 that will have a full PowerPoint that goes through everything again. But for now, I didn't think it was really worth doing that because I think I'm going to learn a lot more anyways. And once I know much more, that's when I'll do the full giant leak PowerPoint thing. For now, though, here is just a marked up version of the PowerPoint I put out in a leak earlier this year, and I've summarized with a table of 10 points that you should be aware of. The first point is that despite Zen 6 being able to use double stacked Vcache on a die, it can do it. I'm not taking that back. I have learned this in conversations with my sources recently, that it is unlikely this will come to consumer products. I say unlikely. AMD could give you 240 megabytes of cache on a die if they want to, like I've leaked, but it sounds like they don't think it's worth it this generation so far. Another thing, point number 2, lately I've seen more references to 6nm IO dies, but not exclusively. It's still weird. Again, I'm probably going to put out a big leak in a few months when this is finally decided at AMD, but I can sometimes still see that there might be some fancy 3nm IO die for desktop Zen 6. As of now, it seems like the desktop IO die, though, is more and more probably going to be 6nm, which means less probably crazy features for desktop. But then again, you'll have a dedicated graphics card anyways on desktop most likely, and this means lower costs, meaning that Zen 6 might not cost that much more than Zen 5 if they're just going to use a couple of smaller 2nm chiplets and then still a cheap 6nm IO die. That keeps costs down. I would actually take this as bad if you wanted to spend a ton of money, but good if you wanted to save money on the 10800X3D. Right, now point number 3, I'm just correcting this because it's on screen. Yeah, I leaked back then that they were going above 6 gigahertz. I've since leaked that they are trying to get above 7 gigahertz. So, yep, just repeating that. And then there's point number 4. It is starting to seem like Zen 6 low power is what's being implemented in all of these products. I have documents, I've even shown you one already today, that mentions a Zen 5 low power. Maybe that was a placeholder, I don't know, but more and more documents are just saying Zen 6 low power. Another thing here, although I don't have proof, like I've said, I suspect the R7 and R5 configurations of Medusa Point fit into FP8 sockets. That is the existing socket. And then if you want the fancy 22-core model, that is probably going to require the FP10 socket. Now, point number 6 here. Yep, it seems the 3nm 4+4+2 IO die design 1. But who cares, because it can add 12 more cores with the CCD anyways, going to 22 cores. Just saying that for completionist sake, because I know a lot of people will share this slide without even watching the video. And then at this point, I will also say that it is likely, like I've said, that Medusa Point is 8 RDNA 4 compute units. Also, Medusa 2, or Little Medusa, it's still not finalized from what I can tell talking to my sources, and I have a feeling this has been axed. I actually think it's kind of a redundant product if you have like a 200mm squared variant as well, to have another smaller one and Bumblebee, which is not canceled, which is the super cheap one. I don't know. If it's not canceled, it's not coming out for a while. And then on the note of not coming out for a while, Halo and Bumblebee are nowhere near finalized from what I'm seeing behind the scenes. I think specs are subject to change from what I've already leaked about them. And, well, just don't expect it next year. It really is far out. And then finally, I can't find any more references to Little Halo. So I think that there is just like a Medusa Halo, and if there are other products that fill out the APU range, they're going to be called something else, or they might be called something called Magnus. That's right, Magnus. Now we get to move forward to the final and most incredible section of today's leak, the section about AMD Magnus. You see, weeks ago, I gained access to a die diagram and some of the specs of an AMD APU labeled as Magnus. And then recently, I've been able to get some more info from additional sources at AMD that corroborated the specs, told me some more stuff, and also knew the Magnus codename. And so now today, after knowing about this weird product for a while now, I feel ready to show you this mega APU. Although, before I show you what it kind of looks like, it is important for me to note that this is incredibly sensitive information. And so while I could have literally shown you parts of the die, like literal die shots like I've had for things like Venice before, where I even left part of the die shot literally in the diagram that I leaked, instead of showing any parts of the actual diagram, what I did is I took it, I overlaid it, and then I just started putting colored blocks that were labeled that are nearly 1-to-1 in scale over it. So what you'll be looking at is something that is nearly 1-to-1 in scale that looks like an almost cartoon version of the diagram itself, but is not the exact diagram because I do not want to get anybody fired. Anyways, here it is on screen here. AMD Magnus. The first thing you'll notice is that it has a massive 264 millimeter squared graphics die, and from what I can see counting memory controller portions of it, it's a 384-bit bus. For those keeping track, 384-bit would be a bigger bus than is in the Xbox Series X, which had a 320-bit bus, and it's also a 50% bigger bus width than what you get with Strix Halo right now. This is the biggest bus width that we've seen in an APU since technically the Xbox One X. But of course, this will probably use much faster RAM than what was in the Xbox One X. So this will be quite a powerful product. And then you'll notice there's a bridge die. Again, leak this and other pieces of content. Watch those if you want to know more about the bridge dies. That connects the graphics die to an SoC die that is on 3 nanometer and is 144 millimeter squared. That right there is actually pretty large. That really stuck out to me as weird, that it was this square, large die. Like bespoke, it seems, actually, for this configuration. Probably not shared with anything else. Why would AMD do that? Why would AMD, in fact, and this was very clearly there, and I got this verified by multiple sources, why would they have 3 Zen 6 cores and 8 Zen 6C cores? You didn't hear me wrong. That's a total of 11 cores. And I could not see any references to low power cores in this APU. So, look, I'll be honest. At first, when I was digging through all of these documents about Magnus, I was thinking, this seems like some sort of focused mid-range gaming laptop APU. I mean, you really don't need more than 11 cores for gaming. Frankly, you don't need more than 8 cores. Only 3 big ones boosting high would make sense. Using 3 nanometer would make sense to keep costs down for a gaming laptop. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't have low power cores just, again, to save on a little bit of cost. So those don't seem to take up a lot of space. And this is just maybe an alternative, right? Maybe there was Medusa Point for the mainstream, sometimes paired with a graphics card. Medusa Halo at the top end that doesn't need a graphics card and goes beyond 26 cores. And then this is a thing that has, actually less cores than both because it's just for gaming and it comes with a really powerful graphics card built into it. But then I noticed something in one of the documents I had access to about Magnus. The segment it was listed for was not client, like I saw listed for like Medusa Halo, nor server, like I saw listed for some upcoming server CPUs and APUs. No, it was listed as being for the semi-custom business unit. For those who don't know, that is the same unit that you would list if you were making an APU for a console. And then I looked through some other code names that were on a list I had access to. One was Mero, or Mero, M-E-R-O. This is a semi-custom APU that ended up going into the Steam Deck. Then I saw another one that's been floating around recently, Jupiter, which to be clear, I have no info on Jupiter besides that's a code name that's very real and listed for semi-custom, but this is the rumored code name for a PlayStation handheld. And note that this was the first channel to leak PlayStation was making a handheld. Again, check out that video if you want access to that. And again, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I've got access to dozens of upcoming products now that I'm going to be telling you about over the next years probably. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Anyways, though, when I started Googling around Jupiter and Magnus and threw these names into ChatGPT, it became obvious that Magnus was like another Latin name, like a lot of Latin-named Sony products in the past, and that really Jupiter and Magnus pair well together. Like Jupiter, a celestial body that moves, and Magnus, a powerful, grounded thing. It kind of sounded like this might be, well, it might be the PlayStation 6. And suddenly, once that hit me, I realized, doesn't this thing just look like a console APU? Look at it. It's lacking low power cores because it doesn't need them in a home console. Its CPU config is odd and bespoke. 11 cores? Probably because it only needs to do like 120 hertz gaming well next gen. It doesn't need to go beyond that at all, and that's the exact amount of cores you'll need for it. And I mean, heck, even the GPU shape of that graphics die. I don't know the number of compute units yet, but I do know that this long shaped thing looks a lot like how Mark Cerny of PlayStation tends to design their APUs. It's like a spitting image of a prior PlayStation APU's integrated graphics. And so, I don't know, this elongated, Cerny-looking APU with a bespoke 11-core design and a weird shape. This has Cerny written all over it, in my opinion. And so, yeah. Look, to be clear, I don't have anything on any document that says PlayStation 6 or Sony. I want to be clear about that. Having said that, I don't think these documents would say that anyways, because that's by design. They use code names and don't tell you about what products these designs will go into, so that people working at AMD or with AMD do not know exactly what they're working on. So either way, it wouldn't be labeled. And therefore, though, it could be. It could be an APU for a Surface laptop or some sort of mid-range gaming APU like I initially thought. It could be. It honestly could even be the next-gen Xbox. I think that's totally possible. I could see Magnus being a codename for next-gen Xbox. But that design, that shape, everybody, this looks like a PlayStation 6 to me.